Bibek, Debroy, Sitanshu, Yashaschandra, and Artie Prasad, who will be in conversation with Maina, Singh. Ladies and gentlemen, our panelists.
Namaskar, good afternoon. Thank you for a packed audience. Everything is packed today, Sunday afternoon, but thank you for being here. We're exploring this whole notion of how the heritage of ancient Indian knowledge that has survived through texts, through practices, through cultural practices, has permeated different aspects of life in India, and what is the relevance of it today. And we have three very illustrious speakers here, all with very diverse forms of engagement in their intellectual and professional lives. And we are going to explore through their work the interconnections and the connections they have with forms of ancient Indian knowledge systems. I will introduce my speakers. To my right is Professor Sitanshu Yashaschandra Mehta. Sitanshu ji is broadly within literature and humanities. He's been a professor of Gujarati, a poet, a scholar, a translator, also a playwright. And as I was looking up his works, I saw the title of a play that intrigued me. It said, Amanas Madrasi Lageche. And I thought that was so curious. Was it about stereotypes of different states? And maybe he will tell us at some point. He also wrote the screenplay for this film called Maya Memsab, which is a 1993 film starring Shah Rukh Khan as well. It was based on Flaubert's novel Madame Bovary. He's also been engaged with literary historiography. He's served at several universities internationally. He has been Vice Chancellor of Saurashtra University, Sahitya Academy Award winner in 1987, and later Padma Shri Award winner. So very grateful to have you here on the panel. Thank you. On his right is Dr. Bibek Debroy. I think doctored many times, and the last doctorate has been conferred on him yesterday by Amity University, and he was surprised that I knew about it. But in this day and age, there is no hiding anything. So it was on Twitter. He's been at Trinity College, Cambridge. He's an economist. He's been director of Rajiv Gandhi Institute of Contemporary Studies, has been part of several high-powered committees associated with the Niti Aayog since its inception. He's authored several books, including The India Mosaic, Searching for an Identity, which was 2004, but several others which deal with rural development, panchayat reforms, integrating India's poor, issues of labor. In 2010, he co-authored Getting India Back on Track, a very timely piece of writing. At the moment, he heads a panel on restructuring the railways. The reason I'm going into all these functions and writings is to show how deeply grounded he is in economics. But he has also written extensively on the Holy Vedas, which is 1999. And most recently, he has published a translation of the Mahabharata in 10 volumes. And 10 volumes which he wrote over 4 years. 4 years, that's what is public knowledge. Maybe he will tell us how much longer it actually took. But he has published those 10 volumes, and the important thing is that it's the first unabridged translation of the Mahabharata. He has been conferred the Padma Shri in 2015. Congratulations to you for that. And as I said, there is no anonymity anymore, and so I discovered that it's actually your big birthday tomorrow. So let's say happy birthday. I was laughing and saying just a few minutes before that below the stage, and I said to them, you know, when people are so eminent in their work, they speak about their work all the time. So it's very boring. So how do you actually make them interested in what they're supposed to say and they've been saying? So I said, I'm going to surprise you. And so this is to say happy birthday to you in advance. And then to his right is Dr. Artie Prasad. Yet another very fascinating expertise she brings to the panel. Aarathi has a PhD in molecular genetics from Imperial College London. She is a former researcher in cancer genetics, and she is the author of How Science is Redesigning the Rules of Sex. So as you can see, it's very cutting edge work and very provocative research. One of her pieces is called Rewinding the Menopause. So maybe we have a lot of questions about what she means by that. This is new research on women's fertility, and her work on Quest for Virgin Birth was featured in Channel 4. She has been writing, Aarathi has been writing extensively on social issues related to the issues of race. For example, she is speaking about issues of racial mixing and its implications for genetic diversity and enrichment. That was a fascinating piece I read a few days ago. So here we have on the panel an economist, a scholar from humanities and a creative writer, and a biologist who works on gender, race, multiculturalism in a diaspora space. So we're all set to explore basically 2 or 3 questions. The first aim of this panel, as I see it, is through the experiences of our speakers to see how their own work connects to or invokes Indian knowledge systems, either in what they have done or, as Aarathi will tell us, about the work that is about to be published. So Sitanshu, I'm going to start with a question for you. I'm reflecting a little bit on the conversation that you and I had yesterday about how ancient Indian knowledge systems enjoyed a certain proliferation and influence for several centuries historically. And then around the 12th or 13th century, there was a challenge, a contestation to that world of established knowledge systems. And so whether you want to include that as a time when the Bhakti movement came up or other ideological cross currents that came up. And then, as you said, that the next major contestation was when these systems got pitted against colonialism. And what happened to these? I remember a very interesting thing you said, that these ancient Indian knowledge systems had a tradition built into them, which was about Vad Vivad, that there was a point of view and then there was a space there for Vivad, for contestation. So I would love for you to reflect on that and tell us a little bit about how this historical span is important for us to understand and if it connects with your work.
Well, when it comes to knowledge, I think all of us would agree that we couldn't have had a more knowledgeable conductor. And that is, on the one hand it is very reassuring, on the other hand it is also quite frightening that she knows so much about us. So that links us up with the way India itself, through the millennia and right at the beginning, looked at knowledge. There are several models that India has thrown up for itself. One is that of the Tirthankara in the Jain tradition. The Tirthankara, through his physical and psychological and spiritual training, became Sarvagna. He knew everything. Even Hemchandracharya, at the second juncture, 11th, 12th century, he was from Gujarat, a great Jain scholar. He was known as Kalikala Sarvagna. So that is the first model. Some people simply know everything. They are Sarvagnas. Sarva is everything, Gna is no. So that is one model which we must keep in mind. The second model is someone who aspires. There is a woman in Indian tradition who is the model of that. Her name is Gargi. Gargi was co-wife of Katyayini, and they were wives of great Yajnavalkya. When Yajnavalkya wanted to renounce the world, he divided his wealth amongst the 2 wives. So Katyayini accepted 1/2, very meekly and very nicely. Gargi asked, "So why are you renouncing?" He said, "I am renouncing because I am aspiring for something higher." I said, "You are aspiring for something higher and you are giving us something lower? These possessions?" So there is another kind of relationship with knowledge, which includes renunciation. So then there is a famous sentence that this woman, the first kind of woman of knowledge in Indian tradition, or one of the earliest, she says, "Kimaham tena kuryam yenaham namruta syam." What am I going to do with that without which I am not going to be amruta? Amruta is not immortal. Amruta is a very interesting word. Amruta means not dead. So she indicates that all of us are sort of dead. We have to become non-dead. We have to live fully. And we are dead partly, living only partially. So this is the second model of, on the one hand, renunciation for knowledge, and on the other hand, claiming everything. There is a third model. I'll place it before you, and then you can.
Sure.
The third is from Mahabharata. वो 5 पांडव थे, वो तो आप हम सब जानते हैं. सबसे छोटा था, the youngest one, was Sahadeva. It's very interesting that he is the youngest one. And he had a particular boon and a particular condition on that boon. He was also Sarvagna. He was a Jyotishi. Sadev Joshi, as we say in our tradition. So he was able to predict the future. But the curse was that unless someone asked him, he was not permitted to say what he knew. And even after being asked, he was not able to do anything about it. I have a feeling that this third, futility of knowledge, is something that India has understood so well. And finally, I would say that this is in contrast with the great European tradition of Dr. Faustus. Dr. Faustus was the man of knowledge. He had a pact with the devil, Mephistopheles, and he was able to have all the luxuries but was still damned. He was a man of knowledge who would have material possession and yet be damned, except in great poem by the German who knew India and wrote that poem, Goethe. In Goethe's poem, Dr. Faustus has one condition. Like Sahadev's condition, the reverse of it. In there, Dr. Faustus is told by Mephistopheles that you must go on enjoying, upabhokta bane raho, consumer bane raho. You go on being consumer and will not claim your soul for the devil except if you stopped at one spot. If you coveted too much after one object of consumption, then you are damned. And he falls in love, not with Helen of Troy, not with any other beauty, but with a small German girl who comes to give him tea. And then when he dies, people from the devil come that you are ours because you have stopped at this little girl. You went on loving her throughout your life. At that time, Goethe says, Devdut bhi aa jate hai. People from Jesus Christ come and say that he is ours precisely because he did this mistake, the mistake of loving. So with this, the mistake of loving. So these four, if you put together, Kalikala Sarvagna and the Sarvagna Tirthankaras, then this Gargi who asks, what am I going to do with this material reality? And Sahadev who knows the futility of knowledge. And finally, our own Goethe, though he is German, he is Indian also. And this condition, I think with these four, there is a foundation for us to talk about ancient Indian systems of knowledge.
This is wonderful, the way that you took us through a sweep where you also showed us the intersections with Western interventions into this, Western interpretations and drawing from it. Again, I want to take you back to, because of your sort of depth in understanding this whole terrain, I want to take you back to the historical sweep. What do you think, these instances you mentioned, what do you think were the points of robustness in the ancient Indian traditions that survive those historical challenges to those systems.
Excellent. Such a pleasure talking to you.
We didn't plan this.
I'm getting nothing for it. So, the greatest robustness is again captured in a story. India is a storyteller, as you know. And the story is that of Nachiketa. Nachiketa's father was a ritualistic Brahmin, and he was giving alms and earning punya, but so giving cows. But he was giving very weakly cows. So the son was annoyed. He said, you are doing rituals. You are giving cows, but you should give robust cows, and you are giving weakly cows. So the father was so annoyed, and this is again, this vivada starts there. This vada vivada, rather than vitanda, is the soul of Indian systems of knowledge. So the vada vivada is between whom? Not between Saurabh and Rustam on the battleground, but this vada vivada is between Nachiketa and his father, who are not killing each other, but the final killing is there, because Nachiketa is sent by his father to the god of death, to Yama. That I give you to Yama. Whom do we give? You are giving this to this. Whom do you give me? I give you to Yama. And the boy actually goes to Yama. Yama is out there collecting us. So he was delayed. We are too many, He takes time to collect us. So it took a little while. And when he went back, the boy had not eaten or taken any water for so many days. So Yama feels guilty that, oh, I should have come back. He has come to my home. Then he says, what do you want? What boon do you want? And he gave him everything. And he said, I don't want this, I don't want this. All I want is knowledge. So the myth says that if you really want knowledge, you can get knowledge from death. Death which ends it all. So if you are courageous enough to confront death, as Gandhi did in our own times, if you are able to confront death fearlessly, reaching it out, then the robustness of Indian knowledge system is understood by you, like it was understood by Nachiketa, who incidentally is again the myths connect with West, because Nachiketa is also the name of one of the most sacred of Indian fires, and fire is also knowledge. So Nachiketa brought knowledge from Yama, just as Prometheus also brought fire and knowledge here. So how Indian knowledge system is our own, and yet it is connected.
Thank you so much, Sitanshu. What I see as takeaways from these intricate and very well woven stories and arguments you presented is that one of the important hallmarks has been the tradition of debate and dialogue. The other is the paradoxical way in which these systems look at death and the way they look at knowledge, which is acquiring knowledge is not the end of everything, and it doesn't mean that also acquiring knowledge is a solution to everything. So the paradoxical and the complex nature of these concepts. I want to come to your work now, Bibek ji, which is that your own work, your professional, I don't want to say intellectual only, because the intellectual is also split in the other field in which you write, but you're so grounded professionally in hardcore economics and Indian economics and all the ramifications we have globally and so on. And yet the other trajectory of your writing is so deeply imbued in the Vedas and in ancient Indian knowledge systems. What did you experience as the pull to draw you into that? Because that work is deeply demanding. It has to have a strong passion, commitment. On one of your interviews, you also said that you were not trained in Sanskrit. So tell us a little bit more about your journey, now that we know that you have these 10 volumes of the Mahabharata translated.
Thank you, and good afternoon to everyone. I'll answer your question, but I'll answer your question a little bit later. At the beginning, in the introduction, two questions were raised. One was the ancient Indian knowledge system, which presupposes a definition of what that Indian traditional knowledge system is. And the second part of that question was, what is the relevance of that ancient Indian knowledge system today? So let me take the first one first, and let me give you some numbers just as a benchmark. We keep talking about the Greek civilization, Greek society, Greek philosophy, Greek culture, the influence the Greek tradition has had on the world. What is the total corpus of all the Greek texts? All the Greek texts taken together? The answer is around 10,000. That's it. Let me give you another number. What is the total number of books published in all languages since the beginning of printing? Give or take a few million, the answer is 130 million. Remember that figure, 130 million. Going back to the ancient Indian traditional knowledge system, to state the obvious, a large part of it was through oral transmission. The Gurukula system. Today we don't even know how many of these shakhas of not just the Vedas but the Vedangas and the Vedantas have simply been lost. They no longer exist because that Guru Shishya Parampara has been completely destroyed. There is a mission now called the National Manuscript Mission, Namami. Namami is in the business of just listing, only listing, mind you, not digitization yet, not translation yet, only listing the total number of manuscripts or puthis that exist in India. They have so far accounted for about 3 million, but the estimated number of puthis, not published books, is around 35 million. So remember that figure that I gave you, 130 million, and here you have 35 million. Do realize not all of them are in Sanskrit. Do realize that even when some of them are in Sanskrit, they are in scripts that we today do not have people who know how to read those scripts. Do realize that 95% of these have not yet been translated. Do realize that there are 50,000 puthis elsewhere in other parts of the globe which have not even been accessed. There is an attempt to castigate the ancient Indian knowledge system, which presupposes that you know what that ancient Indian traditional knowledge system was. And what I am highlighting for you is that most of them have not been translated. When they have been translated, they have often been translated by people from the West, and we criticize them sometimes for not having understood the nuances. But that is a negative kind of attitude, because saying that they have not understood the nuances is not good enough unless we ourselves embark on this process of translation. You use the word sarvagya, which means, as he said, someone who knows everything. That leads me to use the word not sarvagya but sarvagna, which is someone who destroys everything. Collectively, all of us bear this responsibility of having allowed the ancient Indian knowledge systems to be destroyed. And I personally think that it is our collective responsibility to chip in wherever possible to try and resurrect and save what can still be saved, because some of it, as I said, has irretrievably been lost. Now let me answer your question. I will give an answer which would have been somewhat alien had we not been discussing ancient Indian knowledge systems. The answer that I will give to you is, I do not believe that I did any of this. all of this was done for me. I was merely the instrument. And I'm saying that deliberately because we are here discussing ancient Indian knowledge systems. The fundamental principle that I would also like to add to what you have said is the fundamental premise of ancient Indian knowledge systems, the way I have understood it, is the world is not binary. It is not a yes-no answer. And when you appreciate the Indian knowledge system, you realize eventually that I know absolutely nothing at all. When you realize that I know absolutely nothing, that is when I think you begin to appreciate what the ancient Indian knowledge system truly stood for.
Thank you, Bibek ji. You preempted what was going to be a question I was going to throw to everybody, which is that in these constructions of ancient, even ancient is a loaded term because it evokes all, and that's because of Western epistemology. But this whole notion that we often have to counter, which is that ancient systems of knowledge are intuitive and holistic, whereas Western forms of knowledge are ostensibly analytical and deductive. So you have actually preempted that, and I would be happy if you would like to add anything to that.
I would react to it in the following way. There is a certain Western paradigm of knowledge which most of us have been exposed to, most of us have adopted this in our discourse. But there is an alternative paradigm of knowledge, and I see absolutely no reason why we should not be proud of projecting that alternative paradigm of knowledge. That requires a certain robustness on our part as a society, as a collective entity, as a civilization. And I see absolutely no reason why the two distinct paradigms should not coexist, and why we should assume that only one of those is the right way to look at knowledge in general.
That is a perfect segue for me to move to Aarati's work, which is that two systems coexisting, and you are trained in science, you're a biologist, the work that you've been doing with genetics and so on. Where do you find the intersections? I know there was something in one of your writings that's already out there, which is about ancient stories that you use, but you just mentioned as we were walking up the stage that you have actually drawn from other systems apart from the systems in which you were trained as a biologist for your next book. Would you like to tell us the intersections between different kinds of knowledge systems?
I think the reason I'm here is can you hear me at the back? I have spent the last year collecting stories from around India on how people approach their health and what kind of medical systems they choose to use. And so as part of that, I was very interested in Indian systems of medicine and where they stand today. So it was really interesting to hear about the amount of knowledge that we can't access because they're inaccessible, because either they're lost or they haven't been translated. So one of my chapters in the new book, which is called In the Bone Setter's Waiting Room, travels through Indian medicine.
There's an echo. I can't hear the words so
clearly. I know, it's very hard to hear, that's why I asked.
Okay.
I've spent the last year researching a book.
Yes.
One of the stories I looked at, because it's impossible to cover medicine in India in 1 year and collect all the stories, but one of them I was looking at Ayurveda and Unani. And what I'm interested in is how it's relevant today, and not so much in setting up a competition between the systems, but how it can be integrated. And the reason I'm interested in that, I was looking back at how we got to where we are today in India with the dominant medical system that exists. And as you were saying, in the 19th century, the Indian or indigenous systems of medicine were allowed to be studied as Indology but not as medicine.
Which systems would you include in that? Are you including Unani or are you just including Ayurveda? When you say Indian systems?
I've only looked predominantly at Unani and Ayurveda, so that's all I can talk about. But so I guess at independence, because the British Western medicine was used in India while the British were here, at independence you have a really interesting situation. What do we do now that the British have gone? Do we continue using what we had to be taught before? Do we go back to our own systems? And so I was reading about the Chopra Committee in 1947 that was set up to look at the possibility of integrating the different systems of medicine. And the decision that was taken was to mainstream Western medicine. And it's surprising how recent the creation of the of Ayush and the ministry looking at Indian systems of medicine was, I mean, many, many years after independence. My grandfather was a professor of Ayurvedic medicine, and he was secretary to the Chopra Committee. And so that was, nearly 70 years ago. And here we are now in 2016. And I visited researchers and Ayurvedic doctors who are very interested in Ayurveda working together in an integrated system and setting up integrated hospitals that use both. But it's interesting that they are using the language of biomedicine, and they are using chemical and genetic analysis in using the biomedicine system of clinical trials and diagnostics, to understand how Ayurvedic medicine works or can be translated. Because what happens is when a patient goes to an Ayurvedic doctor or Unani doctor, they're talking about things like blood pressure measurements, blood sugar measurements. They know what a Western allopathic doctor would tell them, and they go to the Ayurvedic doctor with that information. And so there's an important place for exchange of, I think there's an important place for both. So I think what I've discovered in traveling, in writing this book, is that there's a real interest now in mainstreaming Ayurveda again, and not losing that knowledge, but making it translatable to the way patients think about their health or have come to think about their health now.
It's interesting, Aarti, that you're speaking about a modern phenomenon that we see about what you call integrated medicine, meaning that the two schools, the Western and the non-Western systems of medicine, are not seen as conflicting. It just so happens that I've also worked on the history of medicine myself and within colonialism, so this is really of interest to me. However, with a sociologist lens, I can't stop thinking of two other things that I would love to pose as questions to you. One is that this resurgence of Ayurveda might well be a class phenomenon in India. I'd like you to think about it. That it's urban, it's stylish, Ayurveda spa, Ayurveda, it sells for a lot of money. Is this revival to do also with really class issues? And that, which brings me to the second point, which is that when we say during colonialism, Western medicine came in, and then after that there was this rethinking and so on, I actually feel that we've been living in these 2 or 3 centuries all our lives. And that while the missionaries were setting up institutions, hospitals in Vellore, which were doing joint transplants in the early decades of the 20th century, even today there are births in rural India that are at home and very high infant mortality. So while we may be children of mothers who went to hospitals, that I don't know that historically we can see a cutoff point, and maybe people in the audience would like to respond and share. I'm just throwing it out there. That I don't know that it's been a transition really. I think it's been a coexistence because of the way that we are complex and diverse, and different levels of development are sort of shockingly different from each other. So this integrated medicine thing is probably, I don't know, I'd like you to consider that. Is it really an institutionalization of something that was going on in any case?
Yeah, that's a really good point, but I think that what people are seeing now is that all systems, the pluralistic system, has something to offer, and how best to use both. Because if you're thinking about communicable diseases, infections.
Yes.
That's something that people tend to go to Western medicine for. But we're seeing an increasing prevalence of non-communicable diseases, lifestyle diseases, diabetes and obesity, and heart disease that in some part come from the way we live and what we eat. And I think that there is probably a real place for using both to counteract, to take from what you want. And the doctors I met, especially the Unani doctors, because I just want to say as well, I don't think there are ancient knowledge systems in medicine, but it's been through a constant process of self-criticism and evolution, just like modern science has been. And you see that if you look at the way people have written about Ayurveda over the last few hundred years. The socioeconomic thing is really interesting because I wanted to get a sense of what people use and why, and so I talked to taxi drivers and rickshaw drivers and laborers and said, what do you use Ayurveda? What do you use? And they said, no, we go to the clinic, madam. And I feel
they go to
the clinic, to the Western allopathic clinic.
Yes.
They just choose which one they go to depending on the cost of the place, because there are different price structures. And I feel like for them, it's for some people using Western medicine is aspirational. That's what, it's
Yes.
Yeah, but then there's the idea of reorientalization. So a lot in the integrated hospitals I visited, one of the directors said to me, when something's adopted in the West, people tend to want to use it here more. And yes, I think people who can choose, have the financial capacity and the leisure to choose what they use and when, will access both in a different way. The people who have less choice access what is around them.
Right.
Yeah.
So this was about your new research, which is grounded in more sociological issues. I want to take you back to your own training as somebody in genetics and oncology. How would you yourself, now that you have more exposure to how things are happening here, and how would you yourself, you live in London, how have you been influenced to be able to use and explore from non-Western systems of medicine to be able to bring over influences or explore when it's a non-surgical sort of an option? And I want to add something else. I don't know if many of you were at Aarathi session yesterday. You were with Atul Gawande. And there was this conversation about mortality and death and how people approach that. And a very personalized conversation when he was speaking about how his father, also a surgeon, had to choose about whether to go into chemo and more, and so he chose that he would not do that. So there are also these debates about choices people make which may actually contradict the sort of straight line Western therapies. And so given our earlier conversation about death and mortality and linking up with what you spoke about yesterday to Atul Gawande, would you think that ancient Indian systems offer something in those cases where basically in Western medicine they say, you know what, this is all we have, try it, don't try it, we don't really know the odds. As he said yesterday, it might be 3 months, it might be 3 years. And so do you think in your area that this might be something too?
And this, I don't think of, I don't think of indigenous systems of medicine as something ancient. It's very modern, it's very relevant, it's constantly evolving and developing and has been in conversation with other systems as they come in. You see Ayurveda starting to use opium and things that have come in from the Islamic world at some point, for example. But what the conversations we've been having with Atul and other doctors here that have been really interesting is about how in the West, in Western medical concept, the body and mind is very much separated.
Absolutely.
Whereas here, I mean, the way that psychiatric conditions are considered, or the way that embodiment of a problem is considered, is inseparable, your body and mind. And what Atul was talking about, when you come to death and when you come to serious illness, it's about maintaining your well-being rather than sticking tubes down your throat or having more and more interventions in the hope of fighting off death. It's you know, when do you? I think in England anyway, the conversations the National Health Service is having at the moment,
Yes.
is well-being, and that's looking at the social determinants of health. What makes us ill? So I feel like the West is moving towards this more holistic way of thinking and moving more towards the Eastern idea that there isn't that separation between but we can't keep on doing medicine like this.
Right, I think they're more sensitive to that in Britain, much less so in the US still, where it's still very, very transactional and commercialized. But Bibek, I want to come back to what you had said, and I want you to reflect on how these knowledge systems that have been lost, and we've all allowed them to be lost, how can they be brought into our everyday realities? And this is like a totally non-expert kind of a question, because beyond ethics and morality, how else can we use them or draw upon them for the sociology of our lives?
You almost seem to be suggesting that I should be interested in it only if it has a commercial value. You didn't exactly use those words.
For ourselves, not commercial, for ourselves.
Yeah, you didn't use those words, but this is a standard response that sometimes one encounters. I don't think one is looking at these knowledge systems only from that point of view. One is looking at these knowledge systems because they represent our history, they represent our culture, they represent a lot that has gone into making India what it is today. I will give you two anecdotal examples. I have a manuscript. I don't have the manuscript. I have a photocopy of a manuscript that goes back to the 12th century. The original manuscript is in London. What is this manuscript titled? The manuscript is titled Yashaschandra. It is a manual for thieves. It has never been translated. If I were to translate it and if I were to find a publisher, it would run into 500 printed pages. So imagine the kinds of things people thought of. The second anecdote that I'm going to give to you is, it will take a little bit of time.
Sure.
Most of us here are aware that Valmiki is regarded as the first poet, the first Kavi. Kavi is not actually poet,
Yes.
better translated would be a wise man, wise person. And he thought, composed the first shloka, and all of us know that story about the two birds. And that first shloka goes as follows. Ma nishada pratishtang tvamagama shashvati sama yat krauncha mithunat ekam vadhi kamo mohitam. The translation is not important. What is important is this particular chanda. Chanda Shastra is the study of rhythm and meters. This is supposed to have been the first shloka which was composed in Anushtupa. One of the slokas, one of the meters, one of the chandas that is regularly used in the Ramayana and the Mahabharata and the Puranas. Let me recite another shloka for you. Saraswati Mahabhage Vidde Kamalalochane Vishyarupe Vishalakshmi Vidyam Dehi Namastute, or something else. Vakratunda Mahakaya Surya Koti Samaprabha Nirvignam Kurume Deva Sarvakaryeshu Sarvada. We recite these two all the time without realizing they are in Anushtupa. I can give you examples of several Bollywood film songs which are in Anushtupa, except we do not realize they are in Anushtupa. Which brings me to a direct answer to your question, why don't we realize it? Because in the curricula, in the methods of teaching, which are borrowed heavily on the West, we have assumed that all of these are useless, and therefore they are not integrated into curricula beginning from kindergarten. Our collective responsibility, and I repeat, our collective responsibility is to ensure that all of these are integrated, all of these are studied. One of the things I'd like to mention as a sweeping generalization is, if you look at two elements which have survived the colonial legacy, those are music and dance.
True.
They have survived because they could not be pinned down. When you can pin down painting and say painting has to conform to this, that and the other, you kill it. An Indian musical performance or a dance performance is not rehearsed. You go today and you go tomorrow. What you will hear or see today is not what you will see or hear tomorrow. That is the essential nature of creation, and I am presenting to you a completely different paradigm that has existed. And therefore, music, dance, chanda, all of these occur naturally to us. If we begin to teach Sanskrit, not in terms of mugging up grammatical tables, but in terms of these, then we will be able to ensure that not only Sanskrit, but I keep saying Sanskrit, but what I said is equally true of many of the other vernacular languages. These will all survive, and it is our job collectively to do it.
Amen. I'm just wondering one final thing, if you would like to reflect on the categorization, any of the speakers, on the categorization, Indian systems of knowledge, Vedic systems of knowledge, or any other term? Or do you think you're satisfied with calling it this?
I think there's one important issue that you have raised. Is knowledge time free or is knowledge time related? Now, in Indian situation, there are many people who believe that knowledge is eternal, time free, from which the Vedic knowledge and so on, such words would come in. How did India itself, throughout its history, view and how did it understand knowledge? See, had there been no tradition of Vada and Vivada, this eternal knowledge, which many people in mankind believe in, not just so Vedic scholars and so on. There are many who believe that knowledge is there in one book or one stage of original and so on. I would like to contest this, and I would like to contest it not because of me, but because of an understanding of how Indian systems of knowledge have been dynamic, and in which way. I'll give you two models. One which laughs at itself, mocking, self-mockery of this Vivada Parampara. Pandits would come together either in Dharma Sabha or in Rajya Sabha. Incidentally, where do they meet? Only in Dharma Sabha or Rajya Sabha. They rarely meet in Lok Sabha.
Okay.
So, and they begin Bho Mahapandita, Bho Maharaja, and so on. And when they don't agree with each other, Bho Mahamurga, Bho Gardava, oh donkey, and so on. So this is one mode of discussion where you can't see the other person's. The other is Purva Paksha, the opponent's view, is presented even better than the opponent would present, and that is Shankaracharya. Shankaracharya presented Buddhist view so well that he was called Prachanda Buddha, that he is a secret Buddhist. He was not a secret Buddhist, but he presented the opponent's point of view so well that even opponents couldn't present it this way. To sum up, knowledge is not time free, and in India is parampara. Parampara is not tradition. Param means going beyond. You go beyond yourself, you go beyond your times, you move along in history. This is historical relevance of time which Hegel talked of. We have also, or why also, much before Hegel, we have believed in this temporality of knowledge, and that is why there is not one system of knowledge but 6 Shad Darshanas. Not only Shad Darshanas, 6 Astika Darshanas and 3 Nastika Darshana. Nastik is not belief in God or not, it is those who submit to the authority of Vedas. There are 6 systems, and those who submit not only to this Vedic thing, there are also 3 more. So this 9-pronged dialogue going on in time, century after century, is Indian knowledge, and that is why it has survived and is going to survive.
So with that, I'm sorry we're totally out of time, and as I expected, we have 3 very, very different positions on the same thing. We have a few minutes for questions, maybe 3 or 4. The gentleman in blue, and then one at the back. Yeah, this lady here, and then one at the back in the red. So if you can take the mics, please. Ji.
Hello.
We'll take the questions together, and you can tell us who you want to address.
To the panel.
All right, so you give us your question.
My question is that when we read Ramayana and Mahabharata, we have the reference of Brahmastra, reference to Pushpak Viman, and the birth of Kauravas with the IVF method, test tube babies and all such things. So how relevant are these?
Okay, next question here, the young woman. Yes?
Hi, first of all, I think the point about integrating the ancient systems of knowledge in the curricula is very relevant, and I think it's actually an example of a solution that we can have so that we, and this is an obstacle I think we put in our own path because we don't see the ancient systems of knowledge as Indian. We see them as stemming from one religion or one belief, which is wrong. And I think that is the obstacle we put in our path in order to achieve the solution you've suggested.
You have a question?
But speaking of value beyond the value of just teaching this and building pride in it, of commercial value, because I think that's also important. Yoga, for example, is a system, an ancient system of knowledge as well, I think, which is related to health. And the whole world may know that it comes from India and we have the bragging rights. But do you see it as a lost intellectual property for us and a lost opportunity for us as well in terms of being able to reap the benefits of commercial value?
Okay, we need to go to the next question.
I'm
Yes,
done.
at the back, yes, the gentleman in red, yes.
My question is to Mr. Bibek. He emphasized so much on the Sanskrit, but we know that in the past we have had languages like Prakrit and Pali, which were the marginalized language. So there must be some knowledge in those languages also. And currently, the Marxist historians like Ramila Thapar. My question is, wouldn't it be very Brahmanical kind of dimension to the history if we look at it only through Sanskrit language? So that's my question, which is creating a divide in the society, the Brahmins and the Dalits. Recently,
Yeah, we have the question.
okay, if the question is,
Okay, so let's have responses to this, and then if my organizers allow us, then we'll have 2 minutes more. Right, anybody on the panel respond to anything? Yes.
First, let me respond to the question on Sanskrit. I believe you had not listened to what I had said very carefully. When I mentioned the Namami mission, I said many of those are not in Sanskrit. Several of them are in Pali, and it may surprise you to know that the Buddhists or believers in Buddhism wrote extensively in Sanskrit. The first dictionary / thesaurus in the world, which people who study Sanskrit read even today, is something by Amar Singh, and Amar Singh was a Buddhist. So please try not to force this divide. There is a greater debate about Sanskrit which I don't have the time to respond here, but it is a myth to suggest what you have implicitly suggested, that Sanskrit was something that was only spoken by Brahmanas. It is also a myth. It is also a myth to suggest that a Brahmana is someone who is a Brahmana by birth. My entreaty to you is not to believe what I say or to what someone else says, but to read it yourself. Ditto for the question on the Pushpak Vimana. Have you yourself read what the Valmiki Ramayana has to say on the Pushpak Vimana instead of reading some commentary on the Pushpaka Vimana or reading something called the Vaimanika Shastram, which by the composer's own admission is something that dates to 1903, 1921 or thereabouts. Exactly similarly about the birth of the Kauravas. Please read for yourself and then you will find the answer to your own question. About yoga. Yoga again is not physical calisthenics. What yoga is, read for yourself. Do not read a book that has been published in English on asanas. Yoga is Ashtanga yoga, of which asanas is a very, very small part. So far as commercialization is concerned, these are not issues where intellectual property comes into being. These are issues where knowledge is there for us to acquire. This knowledge is free, provided we ourselves find the time and the inclination to access it.
Arati would like to say something. I think we have 2 minutes. No, time up. Okay, 1 minute.
I just wanted to respond to what you were asking. And I went in Bangalore to a place called the Foundation for the Revitalization of Local Health Traditions. And I spoke to the director, his name is Yashaschandra, and I just wanted to read you a quote of what he said about the relevance of traditional systems. He said, see, it costs millions of US dollars to do biomedical research, but Ayurveda has survived for centuries and was created by a long history, not by science. There are 5,000 medical manuscripts in Siddha. There are 100,000 in Ayurveda, covering aspects of medicine and surgery. It's highly, highly sophisticated. What Ayurveda needs to do to progress is to use modern tools. So the way we are working now is like this. The theory will be Ayurveda and the tools will be modern. And traditional theory must also grow in parallel, otherwise it will lose its autonomy. If Ayurveda wants to come out of marginalization, today I have no option but to talk to the dominant medical system. It's important to revitalize traditional medicine because of the marginalization of traditional knowledge for 3 reasons. Because depressed traditional communities will get visibility, because patients will benefit, and because the frontiers of knowledge will expand.
So with that, we come to an end, and I thank you all. I'm sorry that we couldn't take more questions.